All right, so welcome back to the church history study.
Bienvenidos a Historia de la Iglesia.
And who would like to open us up in prayer tonight?
Si alguien quiere empezar con oración.
Let's have Tom.
Lord, thank you for this opportunity to be here today. And we sit under the teaching of your word and the subject of church history. We just pray that you will open up our minds and open up our hearts mostly, and help us to reflect on these lesson, to be able to take away what you want us to have. Gracias, Señor, por este tiempo que tenemos para estudiar la Biblia y estudiar la historia de la Iglesia. En nombre de Jesús.
So the last couple months we've been teaching on the 3rd century.
Entonces, por la semana pasada y la última semana también que hemos estado estudiando el tercer siglo.
Oh, more like the last few months.
Bueno, el último mes.
But,
durante un mes hemos estado estudiando la historia de la Iglesia.
So today's going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge. I'm wanting to tie up loose ends.
Entonces vamos a estudiar un poquito de eso y el otro.
You guys, it's like when you put in a 1,000-piece puzzle together, and you get there at the end, you got 5 more pieces. The puzzle's complete. You guys have the puzzle. I just want to finish in those last few pieces.
Es cuando está haciendo como un puzzle y solo queda como 5 pistas y solo necesita esas 5 para que ya está todo terminado y bonito.
So last week we talked about the Roman Empire and the persecution that went all the way through the 3rd century. So this week I just want to finish up with the story of the persecution.
Entonces la semana pasada estuvimos estudiando la persecución que tenía por medio del tercer siglo. Y hoy solo quiero terminar con el tercer siglo.
Mm-hmm. So before the 3rd century, Rome was ruled by the aristocrats. The emperor was an aristocrat, and what do church historians refer to that period as?
¿Tú recuerdas que la semana pasada estuvimos estudiando el tiempo que era el Imperio Romano fue gobernado por los aristocráticos y esa era que Principado. En la época se llamaba el Principado.
But then a shift happened at the beginning of the 3rd century, and it was shift to the generals being the emperor, and that was called the what? Dominate.
Un cambio, y eso era cuando fue los generales, los militares que estaban gobernando, y eso fue dominado.
So the persecution under the Principate was sporadic. It happened in little spots, but the persecution under the Dominate was global and all over the empire.
Entonces la persecución por la iglesia y los creyentes durante el imperio principado fue como isolado en diferentes sitios, pero durante el dominado fue mundial la persecución.
And H asked a question last week, and I wanted to clarify. He asked about if the Jews were being persecuted, and I said no, that's not true. That was wrong. Actually, the Jews were persecuted heavily under the Dominate.
Edge preguntó la semana pasada de los judíos si ellos también estaban recibiendo persecución. Y por el Principado no, pero durante el Imperio dominado sí.
Under the Principate, they were not persecuted as much as the Christians, but under the Dominate, it was pretty much equal. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I wanted to start out with the most famous persecution of the 3rd century. It happened in the year 203.
Entonces, en el año 203 había una persecución que era el más famoso del tercer siglo.
It's the story of Perpetua and Felicitas.
Es una historia de 2 mujeres que se llamaba Perpetua y Felicidad.
And their 3 friends.
Y sus 3 amigos.
And so there were 5 Christians. They were catechumens. What's a catechumen?
Eran 5 amigos y fue catechumenos.
No, they were.
Teacher.
They were in school to become baptized into the church.
Que estaba en la escuela y esa escuela era para enseñar a ellos antes del bautismo.
They were in the catechism so that they could be baptized. They had to, they went through a 1 to 3 year. Once they converted, 1 to 3 year, and then they would baptize them.
Como 1 a 3 años que.
Yeah, new members class.
1 a 3 años para ser enseñado
Perpetua.
Antes que ellos fueron bautizados en la iglesia.
And Felicitas.
Perpetua y Felicidad.
And so we get the story from Perpetua was the one that wrote a lot of the story, and in Tertullian in Carthage, because that's where they're from, recorded it down in history. So this story was written in the final form by Tertullian.
Entonces Perpetua sí mismo estaba escribiendo a su historia, pero era Tertuliano que lo ha llevado todo eso de su historia y lo ha puesto bien para que lo tenemos ahora de Tertuliano.
And their crime was that they converted to Christianity.
Y la crimen que ellos se cometió durante esa época es que se convirtió al cristianismo.
And Perpetua is the main character. She's the heroine of the story.
Entonces Perpetua era como la heroína de la historia.
And she was a mother of a small child, an infant.
Y Perpetua tuvo un hijo pequeño.
And what was different about her in the story from a lot of other ones was that she was very wealthy.
Pero lo que fue diferente de ella, que ella fue muy rica.
And her companions were 2 slaves.
Y sus 2 compañeros eran 2 esclavos.
So Felicitas and Revocatus was the third one. They were both slaves.
Entonces Revocatus y Saturninus eran los 2 esclavos.
And then there were 2 other men with them, Saturnius and Secundulus. You don't have to remember these names.
Y yo no he traducido los nombres tampoco, pero son como en latín, secundules.
But Perpetua's father tried through this whole trial and process to get her to renounce her faith, so to spare her life.
Y el padre de Perpetua siempre estaba intentando decir a ella que tenía que negar a su fe para que no se muera.
And if you read the story, she has a lot of visions from God throughout this whole incident, and you can read the story on your own. And Felicitas was also young and pregnant.
Y la historia está en muchas partes, entonces también se puede ver la historia en YouTube, porque hoy yo estaba viéndolo en español. Y la historia de Perpetua y Felicidad. Felicidad también estaba encinta en esa época.
And she wanted to be martyred, but she prayed that God would deliver her child before the martyrdom so she could be martyred with her friends.
Ella quería ser martirido, entonces estaba orando al Señor que iba a dar luz antes para que su hijo podría vivir, pero ella misma quería morir con sus amigos.
Because remember, they believed they were living in the end times, and they believed that this was the greatest thing that they could do is to give up their life for the Lord.
Even without the end times, it was an honor.
Right.
Entonces creía que estaba viviendo en los últimos días, entonces pensó que eso era la honra máxima para ella, dar su vida para Cristo.
And so she did have the child, and she gave it up to adoption to a Christian lady in the church.
Entonces al final tuvo el bebé y lo ha dado el bebé a una señora cristiana de la iglesia.
And then they were sent to the arena to be martyred.
Y se fueron al estadio para ser martiridos.
So Saturnius and Revocatus, they were the first 2 to go out, and the story says that they were martyred very quickly and very heroically.
Y esos 2 son jovencitos hombres, ¿no? Muchachos. Entonces eso que se llamaba Revocatus y Santarinas fueron los primeros que entraban en el estadio con la bestia. Y inmediatamente la bestia se atajó a ellos y ellos se murieron rápidamente.
And so then Secundulus was next, and he went out in the arena, and all the animals refused to attack him.
Y ya entró Secadules en el estadio, pero el raro de eso es que la bestia no quería atacar a él.
Presumably they already eaten them.
Well, they had plenty of animals.
Había mucha bestia.
When they opened
Practically.
they had all kinds of different animals. So when they opened the cages of these animals, they refused to even leave the cages.
Y igual que en el Coliseo de Roma también había varias diferentes aulas de diferentes bestias, como león, leopardo, diferente. Entonces, cuando entró la persona, ellos abrieron toda la aula, pero en esa situación los animales no querían atacar.
And the ones that did leave their cages attacked the soldiers and did not attack Secundulus.
Y los que se fueron de la aula se atacó a la guardia que estaba allí, los romanos, y no a Secundulus.
And then Secundulus prophesies to the crowd. He says, I will be killed by a leopard.
Entonces proclamó de momento Secundulus, yo voy a ser martirido por un leopardo.
And then the leopard comes out and kills him.
y se entró un leopardo y se mató ahí.
And then finally, it was the two girls, Perpetua and Felicitas. They were out there.
Ya en el final entró Perpetua y Felicidad en el estadio.
And they released crazed cows to trample them.
En esa situación era un poco raro porque tenía diferentes vacas locas que entraban era como pisotear a ellos.
And so Perpetua, after the first trampling, she's not dead, and so she asks permission to put her hair up.
Entonces Perpetua, después que fue pisoteado la primera vez, estaba pidiendo a la guardia si ella podía poner el pelo por arriba.
And because having your hair down was a symbol of being in mourning, and she said she's going to be with the Lord, so she wanted to have a joyous appearance.
En esa época tener el pelo como suelta era como que tú estabas en luto, pero ella estaba diciendo, yo no estoy en luto, es el momento más gozoso de mi vida porque voy a morir por el Señor. Entonces ellos lo permitían poner su pelo por arriba.
And so the cows trampled them a second time.
Entonces la segunda vez que pasó las vacas locas, todavía estaban vivos.
And then they gave each other what's called the holy kiss, and they said goodbye to each other, and then the Roman guards killed them with the sword.
Y ya después, porque no han muerto, ellos han dado el beso de beso santo, como dice, de cariño, y era la guardia que los atravesaron con la espada.
And I tell this story, this is one of the most famous stories because it's well recorded by Tertullian, and I tell this story because this is the normal story. This is the normal persecution that the Christians were facing all up.
Entonces, esa historia es muy famosa, pero también era una historia muy normal por esa época, porque todos los cristianos que estaban entrando a los estadios como así, era igual que eso.
But not all of the emperors were as equally opposed to the Christians as, I mean, we get these pockets of emperors that are very, very violent.
Pero recuérdate que no todos los emperadores eran tan estrictos con los cristianos. Había algunos que eran más buenos y otros que eran más malos.
And some of them were actually kind of friendly, like Emperor Alexander Severus's mother Julia trained under Origen.
Entonces, como el emperador Alejandro Severo de la semana pasada tuvo su madre que estaba entrenado por medio de Orgenes en teología.
And then he had an image of Christ and Abraham on his personal altar along with his other idols.
Alejandro Severo por su altar tenía los dioses paganos, pero también aparte tuvo a Abraham y Jesucristo.
But the thing that the emperors were trying to do, remember, was to unite the kingdom. And they thought if they could unite the kingdom religiously through syncretism, then the kingdom would be united.
Pero lo que más querían los emperadores era unirse al imperio por medio de una religión que fue sincronizada.
I have a question. Because of what you told us last week and how it changed so rapidly, you said in a comment last week that because of what they were doing, the persecution, at some point someone could have said, and that's my question, if you do this to our God, you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah,
Did someone ever say that?
Yeah. They were saying, see what happened to this one emperor.
That's what I was saying. They were saying that.
They were actually saying that. He persecuted us severely, and God took him out. Right. And then the other emperor, he persecuted us. He became a footstool.
So they were actually saying that.
Yeah, they were actually writing this and saying, hey, maybe not in that way, but that was the gist of the message. Mm-hmm.
Hablando de lo que hemos dicho de la semana pasada, que había cristianos que estaban diciendo, mira, como Dios está defendiendo a nosotros, porque hay emperadores que han muerto en la guerra, o otro como la semana pasada que fue captivado y usado como un siervo. Entonces es como que Dios está defendiendo a nosotros.
Remember, the emperors under the dominate, the generals, they were conservative. They believed that all the problems that the empire was facing, the invasions and the civil wars, was because the gods were angry because the Christians would not participate in the civil religion.
Muchos de los emperadores de dominado creía que era la falta de los cristianos porque no estaban participando en las celebraciones paganas, entonces estaba enfadado a los dioses.
So, does anybody have any questions over the persecution? Because that's pretty much all I wanted to wrap up with that.
Si alguien tiene pregunta o comentario de la persecución.
I have one question. When you said that they were accused of converting to Christianity, I'm assuming they were coming from paganism, right?
Yes.
Okay. Worshipping the emperor as God and other gods.
Right.
Okay.
And so it was illegal to convert. It was illegal to be a Christian, but it was also illegal to convert to Christianity.
But conversion must have been awful, really.
Yeah.
If you were a Christian before, you're a Christian.
Right.
If you were with a pagan,
right.
that's not so good.
That they were seen as treasonous.
To the emperor.
Que eso fue como una traición para ellos convertirse desde una religión pagana que era el Imperio Romano hasta cristianismo.
Sorry, you were talking about Julia.
Julia was the mother of one of the emperors.
The mother of one of the
that trained under Origen.
And she converted herself to Christian?
No, she didn't convert, but it just shows you how some of the emperors were more friendly because, I mean, even the mother was training under Origen was a genius. And so...
And a Christian.
And a Christian. So everybody, governors would come to be trained under him. So he was converting a lot of people because he was such a genius, such an intellect power. Like he defeated Celsus and all that. And it was just like everybody was coming to be taught under him.
Like ancient C.S. Lewis.
Yes. And you need to translate any of that? Okay. No, we'll move on. So, another thing I want to talk about is the transformation. Some of the transformation that was happening. It was astonishing in the 3rd century between the way the church started at the end of the 2nd century to the end of the 3rd century. There's just this huge transformation that takes place.
Entonces, una transformación grande que se pasa desde el final del tercer siglo hasta el principio de the 2nd century?
The beginning of the 3rd century to the end of the 3rd century.
El principio del tercer siglo hasta el final del tercer siglo.
And so at the beginning of the 3rd century, the church goes from this unorganized, underground, just this movement, kind of like just, I don't know, kind of hodgepodge, patchwork of movement.
Entonces, el principio es como que la iglesia primitiva no está muy ordenada y que están haciendo cosas diferentes en las diferentes iglesias, pero después...
But by the end of by the year 300, the end of the 3rd century, by the year 300, it's a highly organized, highly structured church, and there's a church in every single city in the Roman Empire.
Pero por el final del tercer siglo es como una iglesia muy ordenada y que tiene mucha estructura y hay una iglesia en cada de las ciudades en el Imperio Romano por el final del tercer siglo.
And within just a few years after that, it becomes the official church of the Roman
Y
Empire.
solo pocos años después de eso fue el cristianismo el oficial religión del imperio.
But we're not there yet. We still got a little bit before.
No hemos llegado ahí todavía.
There were 3 things that contributed to this. 3 things that contributed to the church becoming organized.
Entonces, 3 cosas que fueron parte de eso, ordenar la iglesia.
The first thing we already talked about, we talked about all these things, but Cyprian organizing the church under the authority of the bishops.
El primero era Cipriano, que estaba ordenando a la iglesia por la autoridad de los obispos.
They was always under the authority of the bishops, but now it was more organized as a federation. Do you guys remember what that means?
Siempre fue ordenado por obispo, pero ahora fue como un federativo.
What's the federation
lo
mean?
que era federativo?
Like an organization between all the churches, no?
All the bishops held the same authority, and they would meet now they started meeting in synods, which were councils, and the bishops all held the same power. They were all equal, and that's how they solved the problems in the church. So the church was much more organized to handle the heretics.
And stronger.
And stronger.
Entonces todos los obispos estaban más ordenados porque estaba todo junto y tenía cosas que se llamaba sínodos. Y eso era como un concilio de obispos que se reunía para solucionar problemas y estar más unidos.
The second thing was, remember, we didn't have the Bible completely canonized yet, and so we had the establishment of the creeds, and these were what a Christian must believe, what a person must believe in order to say that they are a Christian.
Entonces no tuvimos como la escritura fija, pero tuvimos credos. Recuérdate que los credos era como qué es la creencia que nosotros. Entonces tienes que creer lo que dice credo.
And the third was the slow formulation of Scripture, the New Testament and the Old Testament
Y el
Scripture.
tercer era la formulación de la escritura poniendo el Antiguo Testamento con el Nuevo Testamento.
And we've already talked about all these things, but none of them were actually complete at the beginning of the 3rd century or at the end of the 3rd century, but it was still an ongoing process.
Entonces lo hemos hablado de esas tres cosas antes, pero no estaba como cumplido en el principio del tercer siglo ni en el final del tercer siglo.
Sorry, because I've been reading this week in relation to this study, there were lots of other Gospels not included yet, so they were all reading all of this stuff.
It's all out there.
There was no defined reading list.
There was, but it wasn't official yet because the church hadn't
So
been.
there was a ton of stuff out.
There was a lot of Gnostic Gospels, but they were written in the 2nd century, so they're much later.
Right.
Like the Gospel of Thomas and the
Thomas, that's
Gospel.
what I was thinking.
They're all written in the second, like 100 years or more after Christ. And so that wasn't really written by Thomas. It was just made up by the Gnostics. Yeah.
Entonces, diciendo de las diferentes escrituras que estaban por allí, por ejemplo, algunos de los libros que eran gnósticos, como el Evangelio de Tomás, que no fue escrito por Tomás, y diferentes como así, que no fueron parte de la escritura, pero había gente que estaba intentando ponerlo ahí.
But it's kind of astonishing that the church could organize like this because we had all the external and all the internal attacks. We had the external persecution and all the cults attacking from the inside. But even with those two things happening in the 3rd century, they were able to organize.
It's astonishing the purity of the church survived.
Yeah, God protected the gospel.
There were so many things going on.
Como lo hemos visto, un montón de la amenaza que estaba fuera de la iglesia y lo que estaba dentro. Y fueron muchos, pero todavía el Señor estaba protegiendo a su iglesia.
The main problem that they were facing internally in the 3rd century was because of the persecution. Who's going to have the authority? What is it going to be? The confessors? Remember who's the confessors?
Por el tercer siglo había ese problema de quién va a tener la autoridad en la iglesia. Había los confesores. ¿Quién recuerda quién eran los confesores?
Who were the confessors?
The ones that didn't deny that.
Yes, the ones that were persecuted but did not deny the Lord.
Fueron cristianos que fueron perseguidos y no han muerto y no han negado al Señor tampoco.
Because in the 3rd century, there's a shift between lay leaders and official clergy. And so who's going to have the official authority in the church? Is it going to be these confessors who's going to be able to forgive sins and administer the communion? Or is it going to be the bishops? And so we had this, it's called the Novatian Schism. And so because Novatius was on the side of the confessors, Cyprian was on the side of the bishops.
Entonces, el esquismo novación era básicamente eso, una separación de la gente, los que querían la autoridad por los confesores y los que querían la autoridad por los obispos.
Which is right.
What's that?
Which is right.
Well, the bishops, because that was in the line of apostolic authority.
Right. Okay.
Entonces,
Because the church, that was the only thing that was holding the church together at that point.
Right.
verdaderamente debe de ser los obispos, porque los obispos estaban en la asociación apostólica, porque eran los apóstoles que lo ha aprobado esa gente.
It lasted for several generations, but eventually the bishop was fully established as the rightful head of the church.
Entonces esa discusión duró generaciones, pero en el final era el obispo que tenía la autoridad.
Let me jump ahead here. I've already said a bunch of this.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question? So the bishops were they like the elders?
Yeah, so in the early church, the bishops was also established as the head of the church, but it wasn't, it was more like a quilt, a patchwork. Like, this is the bishop of this church, and then they were more individualistic. But in the 3rd century, what's happening is they're becoming more collectivistic, and they're becoming like a united front.
Which is where Catholicism began, would you say? Or
We haven't yet.
okay.
Yeah, not yet begin.
Oh,
The
you
church.
have to wait.
We don't want to know
You
this.
have to wait and come back next year.
Y la semana siguiente.
So the Catholic Church the Roman Catholic Church has not began yet.
Oh.
The church is still one. The church is still Catholic, which means universal.
Right.
Entonces la iglesia, la pregunta era, eso es cuando empezó la iglesia católica, como es la pregunta cada semana, pero no hemos llegado a ese punto todavía en la historia de la iglesia.
I've got 1,000 people, you've only got 500, I've got 1,000.
There was some of that going on.
They were, I think that the controversial started because there were bishops that denied God under the persecution.
Right. That was one of the problems. That was.
Yes, that's what the
That's why they
confessors.
started to
Yeah,
say
that was.
The confessors were more
Right.
appealing.
Yeah.
But the church
The
is still Catholic, which means
Let me
universal.
explicar que tenemos que recordar que el problema en esa discusión de los confesores, había gente que quería seguir a los confesores porque eran la gente que no negó a Cristo. Pero había obispos que sí negó a Cristo por la persecución y después quería entrar en la iglesia otra vez, y por eso había mucha discusión.
So the church is still Catholic, it's still universal.
Y la iglesia todavía es católica, pero eso significa universal.
It's still Orthodox, which means correct teaching.
Y todavía es ortodoxo, que significa la correcta forma de enseñar.
And it's still ecumenical, which means one.
Y ecuménico, que todavía significa solo una.
So we have these cults and schisms, but they're not considered official by the church. They're considered heretics.
Tenemos esas sectas, pero las sectas no fueron parte oficial de la iglesia.
And by the end of the 3rd century, like I said, there's a church in every city in the Roman Empire.
Hay una iglesia por el final del 3er siglo, hay una iglesia en todas las ciudades del Imperio Romano.
And each church is led by a bishop.
Y cada iglesia fue guiada por un obispo.
And in Rome, the city of Rome, some cities had more than one bishop. Rome had 40 congregations, each being led by a bishop.
Y Roma tuvo 40 congregaciones y cada uno tuvo su obispo.
And so each one of those, but all those bishops were a federation. They all had equal authority. The one in Rome, the main bishop in Rome, the lead bishop, he was calling himself a pope, but it wasn't an official position in the church at this point in time, and everybody was just giving him lip service. It wasn't really anything. He didn't have any teeth. He didn't have any real authority.
Y que en esa época todos los obispos tuvieron la misma autoridad, pero había un hombre, era Cornelio, ¿no?
Mm-hmm.
Cornelio,
Well, some others
que
too.
dijo, llámame papa, como que él quería levantar a sí mismo, pero todos los demás estaban ignorando a ellos.
He basically called himself the same as the emperor, the first among equals.
Entonces dijo, tienes que llamarme el primero entre los iguales.
But nobody really paid any attention to this. The other bishops, remember Cyprian had a big argument with him and just completely went against him. And
Cipriano tuvo una discusión grande con él y ya después se fue a hacer lo que quería hacer, que estaba ignorando.
so we're
el
still a
nombre Cornelio.
little bit away from there being an actual pope in
Entonces
Rome yet.
todavía estaba un poco alejado de tener papa.
But one of the things that I wanted you guys to see is that as the 3rd century progresses, the lay leaders are losing their abilities to practice their gifts in the church, and that's going over to official clergy.
Pero lo que podremos ver en esa autoridad y sucesión de la autoridad es que mucha de la gente común que estaba en la iglesia no están haciendo como la Santa Cena y los demás prácticas ellos.
So in the beginning of the third,
What would the comparison be for a lay leader now?
just a common person in the church.
Oh, right.
They back like the common person in the church, back then were even though the elders were overseeing the church, they could still do the communion under the authority of the elders. They could still baptize, they could still preach, they could still do all of that. But at the end of the 3rd century, now that's all gone to the elders, the bishops, and the deacons.
Entonces, en la iglesia primitiva, antes del final del 3er siglo, cualquier creyente que era miembro de la iglesia básicamente podía bautizar, podía administrar la Santa Cena, pero por el final del 3er siglo están perdiendo ese poder ellos.
So there's a distinction now between professional clergy and just the people that go to church.
And this is referred to in the New Testament, wasn't it? The leadership.
Yes, but there was less participation from just the common Christians now. Now it's just like, now they're just going to church. They're not really involved in the church because that's all official ministry stuff now.
Entonces está llegando a básicamente decir, esas cosas son oficiales y lo hacen solo los obispos y ellos, y no la gente normal de la iglesia.
I want to talk about the common Christian though, because we haven't really ever talked about the common Christian.
Entonces hablamos un poco de un cristiano o un creyente que es común.
We're always talking about these theologians and apologists and everything and bishops, and I want to talk about just the everyday Christian.
Que no hemos hablado de los teológicos y los estudiosos y toda la gente famosa, pero hoy quería hablar un rato de cómo era el cristiano común.
Do you guys remember who Celsus is?
¿Recuerdas de quién era Celso?
He was the philosopher who wrote against Christianity.
El filósofo que escribió contra el cristianismo.
And then Origen defeated him when he was like 18 years old.
Y Orígenes con solo 18 años destruyó a él.
And he wrote against Celsus and pretty much just destroyed everything he said.
Y también escribió contra Celso.
One of the things that he said that Origen did not refute was that the ordinary Christian was a bunch of ignorant folk.
Who said that? Celsius?
Ignorant folk.
Celso, folk, like common people. Celso dijo que los cristianos que eran común era solamente gente ignorante y pobre.
He said that their teachings are held not in the schools or the academies, but it's held in the workshops.
Que sus enseñanzas no están en academia ni en sitio como así, pero está como en talleres o tiendas.
And the reason why Origen didn't refute this is because for the most part that was absolutely the truth.
Y Orígenes no dijo nada de eso porque era verdadero.
Now, Christianity definitely had talent. We've been talking about it through the first 300 years of Christianity. There's a lot of talent.
En el cristianismo había mucha gente con mucho talento.
But for the most part, for every one of those people we've studied, there were hundreds of just uneducated, common people.
Entonces, por cada una de la gente que nosotros hemos estudiado, que era muy estudioso, teológico, esa gente, había 100 más personas común.
The vast majority of the church was made up of the lowest echelons of society.
La mayoría de la iglesia primitiva estaba llena de gente que eran lo más básico, más bajo de la sociedad.
And that's one of the reasons why by the end of the 3rd century, as